Hello and welcome to the first live debrief of the season here on the Blood Red channel. I'm Matt Addison and our Liverpool correspondent Paul Gorst is alongside me to react to the Reds' 4-0 defeat against Manchester United in Thailand. Gorsty, I suppose the first thing that we should say is that the result is completely meaningless. No one wants to lose 4-0 against Manchester United, of course, but Liverpool ultimately won't be that bothered. What did you make of the game?
I suppose you could tell the difference between the two team sheets, couldn't you, really, an hour and a half before kick-off? United pretty much full strength, obviously without Harry Maguire with the injury and Ronaldo, who's not on the tour, but Liverpool's team's got Isaac Mabey at right back, Luke Chambers at left back, Tyler Morton in midfield, Harvey Elliott and Fabio Carvalho, obviously still inexperienced players themselves. So it was generally a team that was just picked to just to build up fitness, really, and momentum, which are obviously the key things that Jurgen Klopp's looking for at this point. And by 40 minutes, I think he'd already used something like 27 players. So clearly, Jurgen Klopp was not quite as interested in the result as perhaps the Thai fans who come out, basically worshipping Liverpool the last few days, haven't they? But it was a disappointing one in terms of. I don't think the performance was too bad. It was just sloppy errors here and there, and United with their, as you say, pretty much a full strength team. They made sure that they punished those errors. There was some comical defending at times from Liverpool, and United have been, they've been ahead of Liverpool. They started training a week before Liverpool, and particularly with the quality of the players on show, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that it's United who've walked away as convincing winners, because there was a huge disparity between the two 11s. And obviously, as we say, United a week ahead in their schedule as well. So disappointing for Liverpool, but no great drama. It'll just be one that they'll shrug off, and the supporters who've come out will be disappointed, of course. But I don't think Jurgen Klopp will be too distraught as Liverpool's coach makes its way back to the hotel tonight.
Yeah, more about the fitness than anything else, really, for these Liverpool players. I mean, you mentioned there that the performance was actually quite good. I think, especially considering it was three completely different 11s, or certainly outfields, wasn't it, in each of the thirds in that game. For Liverpool, even though they've lost 4-0, it wasn't really a 4-0 performance. It kind of felt like they probably should have scored at least one in that game. And I suppose it's just a case of getting up to that match sharpness.
Yeah, it was just small errors, wasn't it, that made the difference. You look at the first goal from Jadon Sancho. Isaac Mabeya's clearance isn't great. There was one, but there were three who were kind of a fault for Fred, who's finished it off with a wonderful chip. So it's just those fine margins, really. I thought Liverpool did okay at times, particularly the first half an hour with Luis Diaz. I thought he played well. Carvalho was showing what he's about. It looks like he's going to be an interesting player, but generally, Klopp won't be happy with the result, of course, but I think he'll be quite happy that he's given so many players a real, they've been able to get involved in some match practice for pre-season. And we've seen it in the final half hour when Klopp brought on the cavalry, the likes of Van Dijk, Alexander-Arnold, Salah, Nunez, Keita, Thiago. I think when we've seen that they came on, the performance levels went up a notch, and Liverpool were unlucky not to at least claw back some respectability on the scoreline, really. But ultimately they've been undone. But you'd rather be undone in the Bangkok Cup than you would in the Premier League. So United will gain a small measure of revenge for the 9-0 aggregate scoreline from last season. But for Liverpool, it's just about building up that rhythm and that momentum, and on they go now to Singapore for Crystal Palace.
You mentioned Fabio Carvalho there. Let's get into a few sort of individuals from today. I think he, along with Darwin Nunez, was one of the players that most Liverpool fans were looking forward to seeing. It was obviously Carvalho that started the game in the first half an hour. He was in that team, played in midfield, which is interesting. What did you make of his performance and kind of, I suppose, the position as well? We kind of thought he might play up top, but ended up in the left-hand side of that midfield three.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the interesting points of pre-season. Where does Klopp see this young lad playing? We know that he's a versatile player who can play in a number of positions, probably best suited to an attacking midfield role, which Liverpool don't really play with one in that system. So it's a case of where's he going to fit in. I don't think we can make any sweeping conclusions at this point. It was interesting to see him starting in a midfield three, a very kind of traditional Jurgen Klopp system. We'll see whether he starts there again against Crystal Palace, whether perhaps he gets a little bit of a go in the forward line, or perhaps even a little formation change. We don't know yet, but he looked sharp. He looked neat and tidy. The kind of traits that you will have seen if you record any of his performances for Fulham last season en route to winning the Championship. I think he's going to be a kind of interesting subplot to the coming season. Really, all eyes are going to be on Darwin Nunez in terms of the new players, but I think he might play. I think he might catch people by surprise in terms of the importance on him in the coming season. I don't think he's going to be necessarily someone who's only going to be seen in cup games. I think we might see him a little bit more than perhaps some people think in the Premier League. But yeah, I think so far what we've seen from today is that Klopp, thinks that he could be an option in the centre of midfield.
You mentioned the formation there, and that's obviously something that people have been talking about, the potential to go to a 4-2-3-1. But that was something that struck me today, the fact that Liverpool had that kind of player in that midfield. It's kind of almost having that extra attacking player, the extra creative midfielder, but without changing that formation. That's almost like a bridge between the two, where you get the extra player in there, the extra attacker, but you don't have to move away from that traditional Jurgen Klopp system that we've come to see and know. I mean, that's certainly something that I would like to see and would think possibly is slightly more likely than Liverpool completely going 4-2-3-1 every week. It kind of feels a bit more like that's the next step in the evolution. It's slightly more of a tweak rather than a wholesale change.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes we probably put a bit too much emphasis on the difference between those two particular formations. There's not that much difference when you're on the pitch. Certainly, if your third man in that midfield is someone who's a little bit more creative in the mould of a Fabio Carvalho. We've seen it, didn't we, when Philippe Coutinho was at Liverpool and reluctant to use that name, too strongly at this point. But we've seen that he was playing in midfield when Liverpool still had Sadio Mane, Roberto Firmino, Mohamed Salah in the front line. So it's, if Klopp feels that there is, value in that type of player, he'll have no qualms with still putting him in midfield. We have been used to a slightly more industrious three-man midfield over the last 3-4 years, particularly when it was, seen to be Wijnaldum, Henderson and Milner quite regularly, didn't we? And then we've seen Fabinho, who's obviously a bit more of a defensive player as well. Thiago, probably in between both, you'd say, wouldn't you? An archetypal centre mid. But yeah, I think Carvalho certainly his qualities are more suited to an attacking midfielder as opposed to a defensive one. But yeah, I suppose it's just about having the options, isn't it? And it's interesting that for all the clamouring for a new midfielder. I mean, Klopp said last week, we have one, and he name checked Harvey Elliott, and I think he'll probably be playing centre midfield a lot more than he will be on the right side of the front three next season. But maybe they've got two in Carvalho. So yeah, it's early days, and particularly with young players, they're still about teenagers, so I don't think they need to necessarily nail down a definitive position just yet. But certainly the versatility is, the good traits to have for these young players, and Klopp, as we've seen over his 6 years at Anfield, he values players who can play in 2 or 3 positions, doesn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll come back to Harvey Elliott in a second. We'll go back to Darwin Nunez first. Obviously, Liverpool had to wait until the 60th minute to see him. Came on in the final group of players. Obviously, one of those that's only just come back into pre-season training. Again, very early days. We don't want to make too much of a judgment at this point. But I suppose the thing for Liverpool fans is just we've seen him now. He looks very much a Liverpool player. And like I say, early days, but maybe some promising signs in there.
Yeah, there was one in the second half, and he kind of took it down on his chest, and he maybe took himself a little bit wider than he would have liked, but he struck a good effort to force Tom Eaton into a good save. Possibly should have done better with another one that came back to him from close range. I think he put it over the bar, but yeah, it's a very different striker to what Liverpool have had really under Jurgen Klopp, particularly since Roberto Firmino has nailed down that number 9 role. Very much an old school archetypal target man from the looks of him. Klopp was saying last week his belief that Nunez can play on the wing, but for me, he just looks like an out-and-out number 9 to me, and Liverpool are going to have to adjust to that style and play that difference in profile at the top of the pitch. But this is what pre-season's all about, and that's what it's there for. So, first game, I never expected him to play 60, 70 minutes. Thought he might have started, but that no one could have kind of second-guessed that team that Klopp put out. It'll be interesting just to see how even the Palace game to an extent. I don't think Klopp will be too concerned for that one either. It's more when they get back to Europe and they play those 2 games against Leipzig and Salzburg. That's when you start to see, or that's when you want to see some progression, some fitness, more minutes essentially for the key men, and then the Community Shield and that final one against Strasbourg. So still plenty of time to iron out the kinks, but they look like there was more than one or two to iron out there tonight. Just looking at the result first and foremost, and the sloppy mistakes that we've seen.
Yeah, I think one or two other players that stood out to me, Harvey Elliott and Luis Diaz, both of those two looking lively. Again, probably not a coincidence that they've been in training since day one. They've been there a week longer than Van Dijk and Salah and Nunez and all of those players. Let's go with Elliott first. What did you make of his performance?
It's difficult to say, really. I mean, he was playing on the right of that midfield three, wasn't he? And that's where we're expecting him to play pretty much when he is selected this coming season. But I don't know, really. I mean, it's difficult to make any huge judgments either way. He's still kind of, making his way back to full fitness, I'd imagine, after that horrendous injury. He hasn't played too much, as he's played a little bit for the 23s. He started at Southampton, but generally he hasn't played much at all. So he'll just be one of them. He'll just carry on, going through doing the hard yards in training. Which I think the training's more important, isn't it, at this stage of the schedule? The games do serve a bit of a purpose, but it's more about how much work can you get done in those double sessions. So I'd be reluctant to make any kind of definitive call on his performance or his, I still think he's someone who is we're still waiting for him to kind of become a Liverpool player almost, aren't we? He joined, what was it, 3 years ago now. He's had a loan spell at Blackburn. He's had a serious long-term injury, and his first real season in the first team was disrupted because of that. So I think he's starting afresh again this coming season, and they've got a gem on their hands. I'm sure of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Big pre-season for him. It's an important pre-season, I think, for Luis Diaz as well. I think there was a few good signs in there today. As we say, it's still early. You don't want to be making big sweeping judgments on these players. But I suppose for Diaz in particular, having been at Liverpool for 6 months, not really had too much training time up until this point, this is going to be a really important period for him, isn't it? To kind of integrate himself into what Liverpool's coaching staff want from him.
Yeah, I think probably as much as anyone, this pre-season's huge for him because, he came in January and he absolutely hit the ground running, didn't he? He looked like he'd been a Liverpool player for years, but just be one or two tweaks that I've noticed Klopp mention a few times in terms of this pre-season being vital for him getting used to how Liverpool play. So I think we will see a little bit of a different Luis Diaz this coming campaign in terms of probably his defensive work more than anything. His offensive work doesn't appear to need too much work. He's a live wire, isn't he? Every time we see him, he was probably Liverpool's best player while he was on the pitch. Unlucky not to score with a couple of efforts, forced De Gea into a good save and pinged another one just wide. Played so much football last year, though, for club and country, or for clubs and country, it must be said. I think he played over 60 games for Colombia, Porto, and Liverpool. I think he played over 25 games for Liverpool, which, when you think he didn't make his debut until February, it shows you how kind of hectic those last few months were. So this pre-season's vital for him. Probably him and Nunez, I'd say, actually, the two who this pre-season is most important for. So I'd say no one's really come out of today with massive amounts of credit, but I thought he was probably Liverpool's most eye-catching player while he was on the pitch.
Let's finish then with a bit of a chat about the young players that were involved as well. Again, it's a hard situation for them to come into. You look at the young fullbacks that started, for example, Luke Chambers and Isaac Mabaya coming up against Rashford and Sancho. It's an opportunity for these players, though, isn't it, over the next few weeks to kind of integrate themselves. A nice story for Tom Hill as well, nearly 2 years out injured, managed to come back onto the pitch and play today. So I suppose for all of those players, again, can't make too much of a judgment on how they played, but for them just to be involved in this is going to be a massively sort of enriching experience, you'd say.
Yeah, I mean, great to see Tom Hill out there. It's funny when Liverpool made all those changes, and it's Thiago, Van Dijk, Alexander-Arnold, Robertson, Salah, and then Tom Hill. Tom Hill comes along with the rest of them. So great moment for him. I'm sure he would have enjoyed his cameo while he was out there for, 30 minutes or so. Isaac Mabaya started well. Probably at fault for the first goal, wasn't he? But again, he looks like he's going to be a real prospect, doesn't he? So such an athlete, really, getting up and down that right side. A player who can play in a few positions. Sometimes he's played centre midfield. He's playing it right back today. Looking forward to seeing him in the academy ranks this season, see how he progresses, because it looks like someone who Liverpool can mould and make a player out of. I thought Luke Chambers did okay, neat and tidy at left back. Nothing too spectacular, but didn't really seem to put too much of a foot wrong either. So good. A good run out for these young players who obviously would have preferred a more favourable result, but they'll be absolutely loving this. This time in Thailand, rubbing shoulders with the big stars, getting a real taste of what being a Liverpool player is all about. And then it's kind of a little bit of an incentive when you go back to the academy ranks in a few weeks, isn't it? You've had a taste of it. That's what you want to work towards, and that will be something that will drive them on for the coming season.
Yeah, absolutely. It can only be a good thing, can't it, for all of those young players? But that will just about do us for now. Liverpool will hope, of course, for a better result against Crystal Palace on Friday when they take on the Premier League side in their second and final game in Asia. That one, obviously, in Singapore. Plenty more content to come before then as well. The Blood Red podcast, I think, this week will be a little bit earlier in the week, hopefully with a guest appearance from Ian Doyle as well, who's over in Asia, I should say, for us. More reaction to come across the Echo and Liverpool.com's website as well, so make sure you check out all of the analysis over on there. But for now, from myself, Matt Addison, and from Paul Gorst, that's all we've got time for. It's goodbye for now.